Hi class, welcome to week 10 already. I can't believe it. We are just still trucking away in designing our websites and doing web development programming. Your sites look great. Keep up the good work. This week we're going to talk about implementing responsive design. And because of the heavy video content and the complexity of this specific lecture this week, I am going to do this one from home. You have a couple videos to watch. What you should have first done is watch the video on implementing responsive design from Web Dev Tips. They're a great group, and they would have shown you 3 parts to designing responsive sites. And part 3 was media queries. That was the end of the video, and that's what we're going to do this week is implement some media queries. So now we're going to work our way through the lecture, and then the third video will be working through a couple of the pages of the book so you can see it in action. So this week we're going to assess responsive design. We're going to construct a multi-part media query. We're going to test the layouts with an emulator. We're going to add a column with a media query. So that would be like if you started out with a smaller screen, but whenever it got bigger you wanted it to add a column. If they're using a big monitor, create a widescreen layout, and then create a responsive navigation. That's where that hamburger menu comes in, which is pretty exciting. Now, assessing responsive design. Web pages, like I said, can be viewed at a range of different screen sizes. There's so many sizes out there nowadays. And the responsive design allows us to specify CSS rules for the elements depending on the width of the screen so that it still looks the way we want it to regardless of the screen size that they are using. Now, sizing with percentages is important because that allows us to really have that control regardless of the screen size. Element widths in responsive design are often specified in percentages with the size of each element relative to the width of its parent. By using percentages, we can, for instance, place 2 images side by side and assign them each a width of 45% of the page. Well, since it's 45%, it doesn't matter if the page is huge or small. It's going to always be that specific percentage of the screen. So that's why percentages come in very handy. Now, when we are considering what media queries to apply, we need to think about our breakpoints. Our breakpoint would be, when do we want the screen layout to change? Is it at 380 pixels, the size of an iPhone? Is that 500? We need to determine if it's a minimum size or a maximum size that after it hits that point, that's a breakpoint and we want a new style to apply. Now, when we're creating multi-part media queries, we use our first breakpoint with the @media keyword to create the media query. Now, some do mobile first, which means that they are thinking of their website based on a mobile phone layout first and then designing the rest after. And then others, majority still, think from a computer desktop layout first and then do the mobile last. So think about your audience and think which direction you want to start with and then go from there. But once you have identified how many different media queries you want to implement, you would notate those different breakpoints. For starters, I would go with at least 2, obviously your mobile and your computer, but then ideally you'd have at least 4, mobile, tablet, small computer like a laptop, and then the widescreens. Media features are conditions media must satisfy for the rules in the query to be applied. And then the media query includes the screen media type followed by 1 or more media features. And the most common would be the min width and the max width. And we could actually use one, the other, or both in the same query. So here's an example of what one looks like. This is a multi-part media query. So as you can see, we're using the @media screen, and we're putting that the min width is 800 pixels. So when the screen size is obviously wide in this case, then the following style rules would apply. So here are some visual examples. This is a web page displayed on different devices using different media queries. So over here, this is a mobile layout, and then there's up here, you have the hamburger menu really squished up against the side here. And then you have a tablet view where they still keep the hamburger menu, but there's a little bit more room, a little bit more padding around the picture, and so on. And these are web pages displayed on different devices using media queries, but now we're talking about desktop, so a small screen like a laptop versus a large screen. And so here we're saying the second column added to the layout. Another column was added with the picture, so instead of scrolling down to see the picture, now we have two columns. And then here, if you notice, now there's a third column added based on the larger width. And you see how the wider the screen gets, the more roomy it's becoming. And again, each one of these, go back here, they all look great. And they are all using the @media queries. And as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I said, ideally you want to end up with 4. Now when implementing responsive design, we need to first create a default layout for the smallest or largest browser. That's where that mobile first or desktop first logic comes in. And then we need to identify our first breakpoint, so at least one up to the 4. And then we create a multi-part media query using the screen media type to identify that breakpoint and change the styles based on that breakpoint. Now, you're sitting there thinking, oh man, I need to buy a tablet and a phone and a laptop so I can test out all these different sizes. Now, you can use an emulator. Chrome has an awesome one to test out the different sizes so that you can see what it would look like if viewed on that specific device or screen size, all on one computer. It is important to test those websites on the different devices so you can make sure that that's the breakpoint you want to use. And then just constantly test it after you apply the styles, refresh it, look at it, and try the different screen sizes to make sure that each one applies accordingly. You may find you want to add another one based on the option you selected. So testing is always ideal, not even ideal, it's necessary if you want to be a truly professional developer. Now in our book this week, we are going to go through Unit I, and one of the pages talks about adding a column. So you'll actually get to add a column using a media query for a wider screen. It can be helpful to vary the number of columns based on the width of the screen. Obviously mobile would be 1, potentially a tablet could be 2, laptop 2, and then widescreen 3. And those are actually quite simple to do using these media queries. We're going to create the columns in the media query using properties like float, width, and position. So see, that's when now our CSS box model language is coming back. The larger screens provide extra width. Common to add an additional column with that extra width. And you can also specify a breakpoint at which the content width stops increasing. So at one point you could say, you know what, I don't care if their screen size is 2,000 pixels. I don't want my website to be any bigger than 1,000 pixels wide because that is the ideal display. And then what it would just do is add those gray bars on the side once it's hit that max point, which is very common. Now, just as important as creating responsive design, or one aspect of creating responsive design, is creating responsive navigation. Because the smaller screen sizes, not only do we have to deal with obviously the visual sizing of it, but also how they're navigating. Because usually the smaller sizes, they're navigating with their fingers instead of the mouse. So it's a lot harder to hit those buttons if your links don't have a lot of padding around them. The hamburger menu is a great way to apply navigation on a small screen. We see it all the time on various sites, and then that way they can just click on that with their finger to open up the navigation and then click on the different navigation links. This way it doesn't take up a lot of room, crowd up a lot of room on your home page, and they can click on it to activate it. And it actually uses some JavaScript. So in summary for this week, responsive design allows us as web developers to specify different CSS rules for some or all of our elements depending on the width of our screen size. To implement responsive design, we create a default layout with the mobile first or desktop first approach and identify the breakpoints, the first one or multiple, to create a multi-part media query using CSS. Enjoy this week. I'm telling you, you need to work through the pages in the book. Watching this and then trying to do the assignment, you're going to be lost. Walk through the pages in the book, watch the videos that I provided, because this week is just as important, if not more important, than the CSS box model. And a lot of you struggled with that CSS box model week, so this is another chance for you to play around with positioning, with float, and those other CSS box model properties that are complex. By going through this, you will get more and more comfortable, and eventually you'll start to really feel like a pro. So work through the pages, Unit I, and if you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week.